Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into a topic that might sound simple at first, but trust me, it's full of surprises. We're talking about how the Vikings slept. No smartwatches. No blackout curtains. No melatonin gummies, and yet, these ancient seafarers may have slept better than most of us do today. So, how did they do it? What was their secret? And more importantly, is there something we can learn from them? I'll walk you through their nightly rituals, their sleep environment, their rhythms, all in a calm, cozy way. No pressure. Just listen, unwind, and who knows? You might start feeling a little sleepy yourself. Ready? Let's begin. Now here's something that might surprise you. The Vikings didn't sleep in one long 8-hour stretch like most of us try to do today. In fact, the whole idea of needing a solid block of sleep, what we call a good night's sleep, would have felt a bit strange to them. Instead, they followed what's known today as a biphasic sleep pattern, a two-part sleep cycle that was actually very common across many pre-industrial societies. The first part of the night, right after sunset, they would go to sleep for about 4 hours. This was known as the furfin, which literally means first sleep. Then they'd wake up, not because something was wrong, but because that's just how the body works when it follows its natural rhythm. What did they do during this time? It wasn't rushed, and it definitely wasn't stressful. People would use this quiet in-between time, usually 1 to 2 hours, for peaceful, almost meditative activities. Some tended the fire or stepped outside to check on livestock. Others stayed in, quietly talking, praying, thinking through dreams, or even engaging in intimate time with their partners. This middle-of-the-night window was known for being calm, reflective, and strangely productive. And then, once they felt tired again, they'd return to sleep. That second phase, called the afton, or after sleep, would carry them gently through to dawn. Together, these two segments added up to roughly the same amount of rest we aim for today, but with a rhythm far better aligned to the body's internal clock. Now, what's fascinating is that modern science actually supports this. Sleep researchers have discovered that when people are removed from artificial light and digital distractions, say, on a nature retreat, or during extended power outages, they naturally begin to sleep in this same two-phase pattern. The brain drops into deep rest, rises gently into wakefulness, then returns for a second wave of restorative sleep. It's not a flaw in the system, it is the system. What we've come to see as insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to fall right back asleep, may actually be a relic of this older rhythm. The problem isn't the waking. It's that we panic about it. We check the time, count how many hours we should be getting, worry about the next day's meetings, and stress ourselves into a sleepless spiral. The Vikings, on the other hand, had no clocks, no alarms, and no guilt tied to their sleep. They also didn't pressure themselves to sleep in total silence, in perfect darkness, on perfectly designed mattresses. Their relationship with sleep was more fluid, something woven into the fabric of their day, not boxed into a strict 8-hour window. And that mindset made all the difference. Imagine this: the fire has burned low, casting a warm orange glow across the wooden beams of the longhouse. Most of the family is resting, cocooned in fur and wool, while a few figures stir quietly in the middle of the night. A mother tends to a fussy child. 2 elders sit near the fire, murmuring in low voices. A man sharpens a blade by lamplight. Outside, the wind rustles the grass roof. And then, slowly, the house returns to stillness as the second sleep begins. There's something deeply human about that scene. It doesn't feel rushed or artificial. It's not tied to productivity or performance. It's rest, not as something you achieve, but as something you enter into naturally, guided by firelight, not fluorescent bulbs. In fact, historical records from other parts of medieval Europe show that this two-sleep pattern wasn't exclusive to the Vikings. It was common across England, France, and even parts of Asia. The term first sleep shows up in letters and books from the time, often with people referring to that in-between period as a peaceful time for reflection or prayer. So what changed? Why did we lose this rhythm? It started with artificial lighting. When gas lamps, and later electric lights, extended the day well into the night, people began to stay awake longer, delaying their first sleep until much later. Eventually, the whole concept of biphasic sleep fell away, replaced by the idea that you should sleep through the night in one uninterrupted stretch. Anything else became seen as unhealthy or abnormal. Add to that our modern obsession with productivity, tight work schedules, and screen time before bed, and you've got a recipe for chronic sleep problems. Most of us now go to bed overstimulated and overtired, but not in the right way. We lie awake scrolling through news or emails, trying to force our brains to switch off. And when we wake up at 3 a.m., instead of using that time to breathe, think, or just be still, we panic. We tell ourselves something's wrong, when maybe, we're just wired a little more like a Viking than we thought. So maybe the problem isn't that we wake up in the middle of the night. Maybe the problem is that we expect not to, and this opens up an interesting idea. What if we stopped fighting against that natural rhythm? What if we restructured our evenings so that a gentle break in the night wasn't a failure, but a return to something ancient and deeply human? Of course, we're not all living in longhouses anymore. We've got jobs, alarms, commutes, kids to get ready in the morning. But still, there's something powerful in knowing that waking up at night doesn't mean your sleep is broken. It might just mean your body remembers something your brain has forgotten. The Vikings weren't trying to hack their sleep. They weren't measuring REM cycles or wearing fitness trackers. They just lived close to the earth, close to their own rhythms, and let the night unfold the way it was meant to. And somehow, without knowing it, they stumbled onto a sleep model that modern scientists are only now beginning to understand. So if you've ever found yourself awake at 2 or 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, feeling frustrated, maybe try something different. Sit up. Breathe. Think. Listen to the quiet. You might just be in your own version of Furfan, and who knows? Once you stop fighting the rhythm, the second sleep, Afton, might come a little more easily. Now imagine this, you've just finished your evening chores. The fire crackles softly in the hearth. Outside, the world is already cloaked in darkness. Inside the longhouse, it's warm, quiet, and dim. Not dim like your bedroom with blackout curtains and LED alarm clocks blinking in the corner, this is a different kind of darkness. A living, breathing darkness. One that settles in with the night and wraps around you like a wool blanket. This was the Viking sleeping environment. And it played a huge role in how well they slept. Vikings lived in what were known as longhouses, elongated wooden structures, often with walls made from timber and packed earth, and roofs thatched with turf or straw. These weren't isolated bedrooms with doors and privacy. Instead, the entire family, sometimes multiple families, shared the same space. But what really made these houses unique, especially when it came to sleep, was how they were designed to embrace the natural rhythms of light and darkness. First of all, there were very few windows. In fact, in many longhouses, the only natural light came from a smoke hole in the roof or small gaps around the door. During the long daylight hours of summer, they would often hang thick woolen curtains or layer dried grasses over openings to block out excess sunlight. They were deliberately creating a cave-like atmosphere, even when the midnight sun tried to stretch the day far past bedtime. And when the sun finally dipped below the horizon, there were no streetlights, no glowing screens, no buzzing neon. The only light sources available were flame-based, torches, oil lamps, or hearth fires. And this is important, because the spectrum of light given off by fire is almost entirely in the red and orange range. That warm glow doesn't interfere with the production of melatonin, the hormone that tells your body it's time to sleep. Blue light, on the other hand, the kind emitted by phones, tablets, laptops, and LED bulbs, disrupts melatonin like a splash of cold water to the face. Without even knowing the science behind it, the Vikings were essentially creating perfect low-light conditions for sleep. Every night, can you imagine what that does to your internal clock? In modern homes, most of us are exposed to bright artificial lighting right up until we brush our teeth. The kitchen lights blaze while we clean up after dinner. The TV flashes and flickers while we unwind. And then we climb into bed, eyes wide open, brains still buzzing. The Vikings had none of that. Their nights transitioned gradually. As the sun set, the world dimmed. Shadows lengthened. Voices lowered. The firelight danced gently along the wooden walls. It was a cue, not just to the eyes, but to the entire nervous system, that it was time to slow down. Their environment worked with their biology, not against it. There's something poetic about that, isn't there? You could say the Vikings knew how to turn off the day long before we had light switches. And that's something we can still learn from. What's even more interesting is that this deep darkness wasn't considered uncomfortable. Quite the opposite. Total darkness, in a communal home like a longhouse, was a kind of safety. Everyone was inside. The doors were barred. The wind might howl outside, but inside it was dark, quiet, and warm. The darkness signaled that all was well. That it was time to rest. And because they didn't have constant light exposure, their circadian rhythms stayed tightly in sync with the rising and setting of the sun. The body knew what time it was, without needing to check a clock. Melatonin levels rose naturally in the evening, prompting sleepiness, and tapered off with the first hints of dawn. Compare that to us today, where many of us spend all day indoors under artificial lights and barely get any natural sunlight at all, only to blast our senses with bright blue light deep into the night. Then we wonder why we can't fall asleep. Or stay asleep. Or feel rested when we wake up. But maybe the problem isn't our sleep. Maybe the problem is our environment. The Viking longhouse may not sound luxurious. It was smoky. It was crowded. It didn't have temperature control or fluffy pillows. But in many ways, it was engineered, perhaps unintentionally, for deep, restorative rest. Because it followed the most fundamental law of nature: the sun goes down, and so do you. Even the texture of the darkness mattered. In modern bedrooms, darkness is often achieved through sheer absence: blackout curtains, digital detoxes, silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. But Viking darkness was alive. It flickered. It breathed. The fire never fully died out, it glowed softly, a dim orange pulse at the heart of the room. That warm, ambient light didn't disturb sleep, it cradled it. And the way the firelight interacted with the wooden walls, the earthen floors, the woolen blankets, it all created a kind of sensory cocoon. A safe, familiar place where sleep wasn't forced. It arrived naturally. You can almost hear the crackle of the coals, smell the faint smoke and pine resin. Feel the soft roughness of wool tucked up under your chin. All around you, the longhouse exhales. Outside, nothing but the black expanse of night. For the Vikings, this was just the end of another day. But for us, it's a glimpse into a lifestyle that's almost unimaginable now, a world where your home itself prepared you for sleep. And maybe that's the lesson here. Instead of chasing sleep with pills and apps and podcasts, what if we changed the space we sleep in? Not completely, most of us aren't going to build a longhouse and light a hearth fire. But we can dim the lights earlier. We can avoid bright screens an hour before bed. We can make our bedrooms feel more like caves and less like office spaces. We might not live like Vikings. But we can still sleep a little more like them. And that might be enough. Let's talk about something that might feel a little strange to our modern sensibilities: sleeping together. Not in the romantic sense, but literally sharing a sleeping space with your whole family. Maybe even a few extended relatives. For the Vikings, this wasn't just normal, it was practical, comforting, and deeply woven into the way they lived. Inside a Viking longhouse, there were no private bedrooms. No doors to close. No, do not disturb signs. Along the sides of the long central hall, you'd find raised wooden platforms, simple sleeping benches, where family members would rest side by side. Parents, children, grandparents, even servants or farmhands might all sleep within a few feet of each other. Sometimes they'd share blankets. Sometimes each had their own. And in some cases, people hung thick curtains around their sleeping spot, creating small private nooks within the shared space. To our modern ears, this probably sounds a little cramped. Maybe even uncomfortable. We're used to personal space, our own beds, our own rooms. Some of us can't even fall asleep if someone else is snoring in the next room. But for the Vikings, togetherness wasn't just cultural, it was survival. Think about the setting. Northern Europe. Long, brutal winters. Nights that stretched for 16 hours or more. With no central heating, no insulation as we know it, and fierce winds blowing off the sea or across frozen farmland, body heat wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity. Sleeping close together helped everyone stay warm. The shared warmth of several bodies under thick layers of wool, fur, and woven blankets made the difference between comfort and misery, sometimes even between life and death. But it wasn't just about temperature. There's something deeply human about not being alone in the dark. We may not always realize it, but the presence of others, hearing someone breathing nearby, sensing familiar movement under shared covers, or just knowing someone is within arm's reach, has a calming effect. Especially for children, this closeness creates a sense of safety, a physical reminder that they're protected, and that feeling doesn't go away with age. Even today, studies show that people who sleep near their partners tend to have lower levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, and higher levels of oxytocin, which promotes feelings of trust and relaxation. Some researchers even argue that human beings evolved to sleep in groups because it offered protection against threats in the night, whether wild animals or rival clans. In that context, Viking communal sleep makes perfect sense. The longhouse was more than a shelter. It was a living organism. At night, it became a shared heartbeat, a steady rhythm of breathing, snoring, fire crackling, wind rattling the roof above. It was a chorus of life that reminded everyone inside, you are not alone. Imagine being a child, curled up next to your siblings and parents, the cold outside kept at bay by furs and bodies and the low glow of embers. The world is dark and quiet, but inside the longhouse, you're wrapped not only in warmth but in the comfort of presence. You drift off to sleep hearing your grandmother's soft breathing on one side and your father turning over on the other. It's noisy, maybe, but it's familiar. It's home. Even privacy was handled with a kind of quiet elegance. While there were no separate rooms, families sometimes hung thick wool curtains around sleeping areas. These weren't soundproof walls or locked doors, but they created visual boundaries, tiny moments of retreat within the collective space. That balance, between connection and modesty, feels oddly sophisticated, even by today's standards. Now, fast forward to the modern world. We live in compartmentalized homes. Babies get their own nurseries. Teenagers demand their own rooms. Adults sleep with white noise machines and blackout curtains, often on memory foam mattresses that promise motion isolation. We've designed our sleep environments to be as individual and undisturbed as possible, and yet, many of us feel lonely at night. We struggle to fall asleep. We wake up in the middle of the night, anxious, disconnected, out of sync. Maybe we're missing something the Vikings understood without realizing it. That sleep is not just physical rest, it's emotional reassurance. It's the body saying, you're safe. You belong. You can let go. Even in hospitals today, researchers are finding that patients who sleep in shared rooms often recover faster, not just because of better monitoring, but because they feel less isolated. Children who co-sleep with parents, when done safely, often develop stronger emotional bonds. And couples who sleep close to one another tend to report better sleep quality, despite the occasional snoring or stolen blanket. Of course, not everyone wants to share a bed. And in the modern world, with different work shifts, sleep schedules, and personal preferences, it's not always realistic. But there's a lesson here that goes deeper than just where we lie down. The Viking model reminds us that sleep doesn't have to be a solitary experience. It can be social. It can be shared. It can be something that draws people together rather than separating them into rooms and routines. Maybe it's as simple as letting your kids fall asleep next to you when they've had a rough day. Maybe it's allowing yourself to nap on the couch with someone nearby, not because you need help sleeping, but because their presence helps you relax. Or maybe it's just remembering that we're not meant to be islands, especially in the vulnerable hours between dusk and dawn. In the Viking longhouse, sleep was a communal act. It was safety in numbers. Warmth in company. A nightly return to the core of what made them strong, not just the fire, not just the walls, but the people within. And maybe, just maybe, that's a kind of wealth we've forgotten how to measure. Let's take a closer look now at what the Vikings actually slept on. Because if you're picturing something rough and primitive, maybe just a pile of hay on the ground or a wooden plank with a scratchy blanket, you're not giving them enough credit. Sure, their beds didn't look like the plush, pillow-top mattresses you'd find at a modern hotel. There were no adjustable frames, no memory foam, number 1000 thread count sheets. But in their own way, Viking sleeping surfaces were remarkably well designed, simple, yes, but also effective, intentional, and surprisingly sophisticated. Most Vikings slept on raised wooden platforms built into the sides of their longhouses. These weren't just to lift them off the cold ground. They served multiple purposes: protection from drafts and moisture, a way to stay warm during frigid nights, and even a bit of status or structure in the household. The higher your sleeping platform, the warmer and safer you were from the chill that settled low to the floor. But the real magic was in what they put on those platforms. Instead of a single mattress, Vikings used layers of natural materials, starting with a thick base of straw or dried grasses. This wasn't just any random hay. It was carefully gathered, dried, and fluffed to create a kind of springy cushion. Over that, they added dense woolen blankets or felted mats. And then, when available, thick pelts, bear, deer, reindeer, or sheep, were laid over the top for insulation and softness. If that sounds cozy, it's because it was. These layers work together in much the same way as our modern mattresses. The straw provided structure and breathability, allowing air to circulate and moisture to escape. The wool added padding and helped regulate temperature, keeping you warm in the winter but cool when needed. And the furs on top added that luxurious softness, as well as extra insulation on the coldest nights. Now, compare that to today's expensive mattresses, many of which boast multi-layered construction, breathable foam, natural fibers, and temperature regulation. The Vikings were already doing it, all with what the land gave them. You could call it organic bedding before organic was even a thing. What's more, they maintained their beds. The straw wasn't left to rot or compress into a dusty mess. It was replaced regularly, sometimes every season, sometimes more often, depending on the climate and the household's habits. This regular refreshing of the bedding served a purpose we now recognize as crucial: hygiene. Clean straw meant fewer pests, less dust, and a healthier sleeping environment overall. Think about that for a second. Long before vacuums and hypoallergenic mattress covers, Viking households were actively keeping their sleep surfaces clean, dry, and relatively bug-free. All with no plastic, no synthetics, and no instruction manuals. Just common sense, passed down from one generation to the next. And it wasn't just about comfort or cleanliness. These beds were functional. Straw was inexpensive, widely available, and biodegradable. When it wore out, it could be composted or burned. Wool and fur could be repurposed or passed down. Every element of the Viking bed came from nature and returned to it. That cycle wasn't labeled sustainable, but it was deeply There's also something to be said for how the materials felt. Wool, in its natural form, is incredibly good at managing moisture. It wicks sweat away from the body and keeps the skin dry, key in colder climates where dampness could be dangerous. Animal pelts, too, offered not just warmth but a psychological sense of protection. The weight of a heavy hide over your body could mimic the feeling of a weighted blanket, grounding you and helping you relax more deeply. And though we can't know exactly what it felt like to fall asleep on a Viking bed, we can make some educated guesses. You're tucked under layers of fur, the wooden walls creaking softly around you, the faint scent of smoke and earth in the air. The straw beneath you shifts slightly as you move, conforming to your body in a gentle, natural way. The fire is dying down. You feel the warmth of others nearby. And despite the absence of modern technology or creature comforts, you feel at ease. Your body isn't fighting the environment, it's at home in it. In fact, some people today are starting to rediscover the benefits of these kinds of sleep surfaces. Minimalist and natural bedding trends are gaining popularity: wool mattresses, straw-stuffed cushions, organic futons. Some even sleep directly on firm mats, claiming it helps with spinal alignment and overall sleep quality. It turns out, we're slowly circling back to ideas that the Vikings knew centuries ago. That you don't need $1,000 mattress to sleep well. You just need something that breathes, supports, and connects you to the natural world in a gentle, grounding way. Even the ritual of setting up and maintaining these beds brought a kind of mindfulness to the process of sleep. Replacing the straw, brushing out the wool, shaking off the pelts, it all created a rhythm, a care, a sense of respect for rest that we sometimes miss today. We're so used to collapsing into bed at the last possible minute that we forget, the space where we sleep should be something we tend, not just use. So no, Viking beds weren't crude. They were clever. They were warm. They were alive in the way natural things are alive, with texture, scent, sound, and presence. They weren't about indulgence. They were about harmony, between body and earth, between person and season. And if you ask me, that's not such a bad place to drift off. Now, if you thought Viking sleep was only about warm furs and dark rooms, there's another layer, one that speaks to how deeply they understood the connection between the body, the mind, and the natural world. Because the Vikings didn't just lie down and hope for the best. They had nighttime rituals. Small, intentional acts that signal to the brain, it's time to rest. And one of the most powerful tools in their nighttime routine. Herbs. Yes, the same kinds of herbs that show up in sleep teas today, the Vikings were already using them, centuries before anyone labeled them as natural remedies or put them in fancy packaging. Plants like valerian root, hops, chamomile, and linden flowers were widely known in their world, not just for treating illness, but for their calming, sleep-inducing effects. Let's start with valerian root. Today, it's one of the most researched herbal sleep aids. But long before science confirmed its sedative properties, the Vikings were steeping it into teas or soaking it in alcohol to create calming nighttime tonics. The root itself has a strong, earthy scent, some might call it pungent, but it was known to settle the nerves, slow a racing heart, and ease the body into stillness. Hops, which we now associate mostly with beer, were also prized for more than just brewing. The Vikings would gather hop flowers, dry them, and use them in infusions or even stuff them into small pouches to place under pillows. The compounds in hops act on the same receptors in the brain as melatonin and GABA, our natural sleep regulators, making it easier to wind down and stay asleep. Chamomile, gentle and floral, was a staple as well. Its warm, apple-like aroma and mild flavor made it a favorite for bedtime brews. It didn't just calm the stomach, it calmed the soul. A cup of chamomile tea by the fire, perhaps shared between family members in the quiet hours after first sleep, became a bridge between waking and dreaming. Then there was linden, also known as lime blossom, not the citrus kind, but the flowering tree that blooms with sweet-scented clusters. The flowers were gathered and dried for infusions that soothed anxiety and relaxed the body. Linden tea was often used when someone had trouble falling asleep, or when restlessness seemed to grip the household. But it wasn't just about what they used, it was also how they used it. These herbs weren't thrown back like sleeping pills. They were woven into a kind of evening ritual, something soft, slow, and meaningful. In the longhouse, where noise and activity faded with the firelight, someone might prepare a pot of herbal tea and pass around warm cups. Others might light dried herbs in small bundles, letting the smoke drift upward in spirals, something between aromatherapy and a quiet ceremony. The scents filled the air, earthy, bitter, floral, warm. It wasn't overwhelming. It was grounding, and as people sipped or inhaled, they did other things too, things that helped the herbs work. They told stories. Not loud, dramatic tales, but soft, winding ones, often passed from elders to children, from generation to generation. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were a way to slow the mind, to ease out of the demands of the day and into something gentler. Something dreamlike. Sometimes they prayed. Or meditated in the form of simple breath work. Or just sat in silence, staring into the fire. These weren't official religious ceremonies. They were personal, intimate moments, a nod to the spirit world, or the ancestors, or the quiet within. And in that space of story, breath, warmth, and darkness, the herbs did what they'd always done. They helped people let go. Modern science now tells us that this combination, herbal remedies, quiet ritual, and a calming environment, has a real and measurable impact. It lowers cortisol. It boosts serotonin. It prepares the parasympathetic nervous system for sleep. But the Vikings didn't need charts or studies to prove what they already knew in their bones, that nature could calm the body, and ritual could calm the mind. And maybe that's what we're missing today, because let's be honest, most of us don't prepare for sleep. We collapse into it. We rush through the evening, check one last email, scroll one more post, then fall into bed hoping our minds will cooperate. But the Vikings? They made space for sleep. They cued it with scent and story and warmth. They allowed the body to transition, something that's just as important as sleep itself. You don't have to forage valerian root or grow linden trees to take something from that. You just have to treat bedtime with a little more care. Maybe it's a cup of herbal tea, brewed slowly, held with both hands. Maybe it's 5 minutes of silence, a candle lit on the nightstand, or a few deep breaths by a window. Maybe it's reading aloud to someone you love. Or even just lighting some dried herbs and watching the smoke dance for a while. These aren't just gestures, they're signals. They tell your brain, you're safe now. You can rest. For the Vikings, this was everyday life. The scent of herbs in the fire. The murmur of a voice telling a story. The rustle of fur as someone settled into bed. It wasn't about chasing sleep. It was about inviting it. Welcoming it in. And maybe, that's exactly what we need to remember. Now here's something we don't often think about when it comes to sleep, but the Vikings knew it intuitively. What you eat, and when you eat, has a powerful impact on how well you rest. Sleep doesn't start when your head hits the pillow. It starts hours earlier, in the choices you make around your dinner table. The Viking diet wasn't just hearty, it was deeply aligned with the body's natural rhythms. Their eating habits weren't guided by nutritionists or apps, but by the seasons, the land, and simple practicality. And yet, the way they timed and composed their meals gave them a serious edge when it came to sleep. For one, they didn't eat late at night. Most Viking households ate 2 main meals a day, one in the morning to fuel the day's labor, and one in the late afternoon or early evening, before the sun dipped too low. After that, they were done. No midnight snacks. No sugary desserts in front of the fire. Just a few sips of herbal tea or maybe some preserved fruit if it was a special occasion. This gave their digestive systems time to settle before bedtime, a detail that matters more than most of us realize. Eating late, especially heavy or fatty meals, can keep the body busy long after we lie down. The gut stays active, working to process what we've just consumed, and that can delay or disturb the deeper phases of sleep. The Vikings avoided this simply by the structure of their day. After dinner, their bodies had hours to rest and digest before they crawled into bed. And it's not just the timing that made their meals sleep-friendly. It's what they were eating. Viking diets were rich in omega-3 fatty acids, thanks to all the fish they caught from cold northern waters: salmon, herring, cod. Omega-3s don't just benefit the heart and brain. They've also been linked to better sleep quality, particularly because they help regulate the production of melatonin, the hormone that governs our sleep-wake cycle. Alongside fish, their meals were packed with protein, including cuts of meat from animals they raised themselves. But here's where it gets interesting: many of those proteins were high in tryptophan, an amino acid that helps the body produce both serotonin and melatonin. In other words, the Viking diet naturally supported the body's chemistry for falling, and staying, asleep. They didn't know the science, of course. They weren't measuring neurotransmitters or hormone levels. But they were eating in ways that nourished their nervous systems. That kept their energy steady during the day and let their bodies wind down when night came. Grains played a big role too, whole grains, not the refined stuff we're used to. Think barley, rye, and oats, often in the form of porridge or flatbreads. These complex carbohydrates helped with the gradual release of energy and supported the absorption of tryptophan in the brain. Ever feel sleepy after a warm bowl of oatmeal? That's not your imagination, it's biology. And then there were the fermented foods, things like skyr, a thick, creamy Icelandic-style yogurt made from raw cow or goat milk. Skyr was a staple in many Viking homes. Packed with probiotics and protein, it helped keep their gut microbiomes balanced, a factor that modern research now links directly to sleep quality. A healthy gut supports serotonin production, which in turn supports melatonin production. It's a quiet chain reaction, starting with what's on your spoon and ending with how easily you drift off at night. Everything about the Viking way of eating was rooted in balance. Food was seasonal. Meals were simple but nourishing. Ingredients were local, fresh, and often preserved by natural means like salting, drying, or fermenting. There were no additives. No artificial colors. Nothing that spiked blood sugar or overstimulated the brain before bed. Even their drinks reflected this rhythm. Instead of caffeine-laced beverages or sugary sodas, they drank water, herbal infusions, or fermented beverages like mead, which, while alcoholic, was often consumed in moderation and more for ritual than routine. More importantly, meals were often shared. Families and communities gathered to eat, to talk, to laugh. That sense of social connection, being present with others, being part of something, helped regulate stress levels. And lower stress means better sleep. It's another part of the Viking lifestyle that modern science is only just starting to quantify. So when you think about Viking sleep, you have to think beyond the bed. Their approach to rest began long before nightfall, with the foods they hunted, harvested, and prepared with care. With the way they timed their meals. With the warm porridge in the evening, the salted fish hung carefully through winter, the thick skyr spooned from clay pots. They didn't separate food from sleep or health from habit. Everything was connected. Each part of their day flowed into the next, supporting the body, quieting the mind, and preparing the spirit for rest. And maybe that's where the real lesson is. Not just in what they ate, but in how they ate. With purpose. With simplicity. Without rushing through it or distracting themselves while doing it. They nourished their bodies with the same care they gave to their homes and their rituals. So maybe tonight, instead of reaching for a bag of chips or scrolling through your phone as you eat dinner on the couch, take a cue from the Vikings. Eat early. Eat whole. Eat with people you care about. Let your food prepare you, gently, for the rest your body has been craving all day, because sleep doesn't just happen in the dark. It begins around the fire. Around the table. With the choices we make, bite by bite. Here's the part that might surprise you most. The Vikings didn't try to optimize their sleep. They weren't obsessed with it the way we are today. No one was counting REM cycles or tracking sleep stats on a smartwatch. No one was standing in the doorway saying, "I've got to get a solid 7 hours tonight," or debating whether to cut caffeine, detox from screens, or start taking melatonin supplements. They didn't need to. Because the truth is, their entire life, their rhythm, their environment, their habits, was already aligned with the body's natural need for rest. Sleep was just built in. The sun went down, and so did the activity. There was no artificial light to stretch the day unnaturally. Work ended when the light faded, and homes grew dim and quiet. The fire burned low. The cold crept in. Bodies tired from labor, bellies full from early dinners, minds soothed by story or stillness, it all added up to a seamless, natural descent into sleep. They weren't fighting against anything. Not against blue light, not against overpacked calendars, not against the ping of constant notifications. They lived in a way that invited sleep, instead of pushing it away. Now compare that to us. We're surrounded by reminders of how badly we're sleeping. Sleep tracking apps. Calming podcasts. Melatonin gummies shaped like berries. Articles warning us about the dangers of too little sleep and products promising deeper rest if only we'll buy the right mattress or start the right nighttime routine. We know sleep is important, we really know, but somehow, knowing hasn't helped us get better at it. Because for all our awareness, we're stuck in a system that works against sleep. We stare into glowing screens until midnight, and then wonder why we're still wired when we finally turn off the lights. We eat dinner at 9 p.m., maybe later, then lie down with a full stomach trying to force ourselves into rest. We scroll, we doom scroll, we multitask our way to exhaustion, and then ask our bodies to switch off like machines. We've built lives that are bright, loud, and busy right up until the second we expect to fall asleep, and then we're surprised when sleep doesn't show up on cue. Even our bedrooms, with their perfect silence and blackout curtains, can feel unsettling. Too quiet. Too isolated. For many people, the absence of sound isn't calming, it's eerie. For others, the silence becomes a breeding ground for anxious thoughts. Our minds have nowhere to land. No rhythm to follow. Just stillness and pressure to perform the ultimate task, sleep, now. It's no wonder we're tired all the time. Our bodies are overwhelmed, overstimulated, and disconnected from the very things that tell us when and how to rest. The Vikings didn't need a manual for sleep because everything around them supported it. Their homes were dark. Their routines were slow. Their bodies were physically tired by the end of the day. And they didn't carry the kind of sleep anxiety that so many of us do now, that feeling of lying in bed, watching the clock, worrying that every minute awake is another failure. They simply trusted that sleep would come. And it did, but here's the hopeful part. We don't have to be Vikings to get some of that back. We don't have to live in longhouses or churn our own skier. The goal isn't to go backward. It's to remember that sleep isn't something you conquer, it's something you return to. Something you allow. So maybe it starts with stepping away from the idea of optimizing rest like it's another item on your to-do list. Maybe it's about letting go of the pressure to sleep perfectly and, instead, building a life that gently encourages sleep to come naturally. That might look like dimming the lights in the evening instead of flooding your home with LED brightness. Or giving yourself time to digest dinner before crawling into bed. Or swapping out one scroll through social media for a few pages of a book, or a conversation with someone you love. It might look like going outside during the day, like the Vikings did, and getting real sunlight in your eyes. Or moving your body in ways that leave you physically satisfied, not just mentally drained. It might mean building small rituals into your evenings, not because you have to, not because someone said they're evidence-based, but because they feel good. Because they remind you to slow down, because the Vikings weren't sleep experts. They weren't trying to hack their way to better rest. They just lived in tune with what their bodies already knew. They didn't resist the rhythms of nature, they followed them. They didn't battle their own biology, they listened to it. And maybe that's the lesson. That rest isn't something we need to achieve or master. It's something we're made for. Something we can come back to, gently, gradually, and without guilt. So tonight, when the lights are low and the noise has quieted down, try to remember that you don't have to force sleep to happen. You just have to stop fighting it. Just like they did, all those centuries ago, under the flicker of firelight and the weight of fur blankets, listening to the hush of the longhouse and the stories of the wind. But maybe one of the most overlooked secrets of Viking sleep wasn't about their beds or their food or their firelight, it was about their attitude. Their relationship with sleep itself. And in many ways, it was much healthier than ours. You see, the Vikings didn't treat sleep like a performance. They didn't lie awake worrying about whether they were doing it right, or if they'd be functional the next day. They didn't count hours or obsess over falling asleep fast. For them, rest was just a natural part of life, like eating, breathing, or listening to the rain. You felt tired, so you lay down. That was it. They didn't fear sleep. They trusted it. That trust, so simple, so quiet, might be one of the most powerful things we've lost. Because today, for a lot of us, the moment we get into bed, our minds speed up. We start calculating how many hours we might get if we fall asleep right now. We worry about how groggy we'll feel in the morning. We judge ourselves for not being able to shut off. And every moment spent awake starts to feel like a small failure. No wonder sleep feels like a battle, it's become something we're trying to win instead of something we let happen. But the Vikings? They had a completely different mental posture. Sleep wasn't something to be optimized or fixed. It was part of the rhythm of being alive. And that kind of mindset, relaxed, trusting, open, has a powerful effect on the body. When we stop trying so hard to sleep, we stop resisting sleep. The mind softens. The body follows, and they had ways of reinforcing that mindset. Each evening in a Viking household, once the work was done and the fire was low, it wasn't just about getting quiet, it was about gathering. Families, especially in the longhouses, would often spend those hours together, talking in hushed tones, mending clothes, carving wood, or most importantly, telling stories. These weren't just bedtime tales for children. They were family history, mythology, humor, wisdom. They were passed down like heirlooms, generation after generation. And they served a deeper purpose too, they slowed the mind. They shifted people out of the practical, problem-solving headspace of the day and into something softer. Something imaginative. Storytelling helped build a bridge from waking to dreaming. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The Vikings didn't see dreams as meaningless noise. Quite the opposite. They believed dreams were messengers, whispers from the spirit world, signs from ancestors, even glimpses of the future. Dreams could hold warnings, encouragement, or insight. They were respected. Sometimes even interpreted as part of the decision-making process in daily life. So going to sleep wasn't just about rest. It was an invitation, a crossing over into a space that held wisdom and wonder. To support that belief, many Vikings surrounded themselves with small spiritual protections. A carved charm, a symbol of Thor or Freya, or even a handmade token from a parent or elder might be tucked beside the bed. Some people wore amulets to sleep or placed sacred objects close by, not out of superstition, but out of a desire to feel watched over. Protected. These objects, these small rituals, gave people a sense of safety. And safety, we now know, is one of the key ingredients for deep, restorative sleep. When the nervous system feels secure, it allows the body to fully relax. Heart rate slows. Breathing deepens. Muscles release. The body doesn't hold back or stay on alert, it lets go. The Vikings didn't have sleep therapists or white noise machines. But they had their own version of sleep hygiene, and a big part of it was emotional. They felt safe going to sleep. Not just physically, but spiritually. The longhouse was warm. Family was near. The fire glowed gently. Stories had been told. The world outside might still be wild, but here was peace. Even for warriors, rest wasn't weakness. It was strength. A way to heal, to reset, to prepare for the next day. And that kind of cultural attitude, one that embraces sleep instead of fearing or resenting it, can shape everything from how fast we fall asleep to how deeply we rest. It's easy to forget this now, when sleep has become something we track, troubleshoot, and talk about like it's always broken. But maybe what we really need isn't more control. Maybe we need more trust. So tonight, if you find yourself lying in bed, eyes open, mind buzzing, maybe try this. Let go of the idea that you have to sleep right now. That your whole tomorrow depends on it. Instead, think of the Vikings sitting quietly in their homes, passing around stories, placing charms near the fire, listening to the wind outside. Think of sleep not as a task, but as a return. A reunion. A soft descent into something ancient and wise. And maybe, just maybe, it'll come a little easier. There's one more piece of the Viking sleep puzzle that's easy to overlook, maybe because it's not about what they did at night, but what they did all day long. And it's simple, the Vikings moved. A lot. Modern health experts talk about the importance of physical activity for better sleep, and it turns out, the Vikings were living that principle every single day, without ever needing a gym membership or a Fitbit to tell them so. These were people whose lives were built on movement. Not because they wanted to get their steps in, but because their survival depended on it. Whether they were rowing across fjords, hauling nets full of fish, plowing frozen ground, chopping trees for timber, tending livestock, hunting game in dense forests, or building their homes by hand, Viking men, women, and even children were constantly active. Estimates suggest that the average Viking burned between 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day just by doing what needed to be done. That's the kind of output modern athletes might reach during intense training cycles. And they did it every day, not as exercise, but as life. But this wasn't just about being strong or staying lean. Their high level of physical activity had a powerful, direct impact on their sleep, especially something scientists now call slow-wave sleep, or deep sleep. This is the stage of rest where the brain clears waste, the body repairs tissue, and long-term memories begin to settle. It's the most physically restorative phase of the sleep cycle. And to get there consistently, the body needs a reason to rest. The Vikings gave their bodies every reason. By sundown, their muscles were spent. Their backs ached from work. Their hands were rough. Their legs had carried them through miles of uneven terrain. They didn't need to wind down with blue light blocking glasses or try to get tired enough to fall asleep. They were tired. Deeply. Naturally. And their bodies responded by slipping into deep sleep faster, and staying there longer. This kind of physical exhaustion, combined with regular exposure to sunlight, also helped regulate their internal clocks, the circadian rhythm that governs everything from hormone release to energy levels to sleep cycles. Because here's another quiet advantage the Vikings had, they lived almost entirely outdoors. Even when they were inside their longhouses, there were no fluorescent bulbs or glowing screens. They rose with the sun. Worked in it. Slept after it set. Their bodies were in constant communication with daylight, and that kept their circadian rhythms running like clockwork. In contrast, modern life is full of mixed signals. We sit under artificial lights all day, then flood our eyes with blue light from screens late into the night. We work in buildings where we barely see the sun. We move from bed to chair to car to desk and back again, so that by night, we're mentally drained but physically understimulated. And that imbalance makes it harder for our bodies to recognize when it's time to truly rest. The Vikings didn't have that problem. Their movement meant something. Every step had purpose. Every chore was a chance to engage the muscles, the lungs, the heart. They weren't just physically strong, they were deeply attuned to their energy cycles. They used their bodies fully during the day, and in doing so, they cleared the path for uninterrupted sleep at night. And while we may not be rowing longships through icy waters or chasing elk through pine forests, we can still learn from this rhythm. Movement, especially when paired with daylight, is one of the most powerful tools we have for sleep, and it doesn't have to be intense. A long walk in the morning. An afternoon spent in the garden. Carrying groceries up the stairs. Dancing in the kitchen. Chopping vegetables by hand. Taking the long way home. These are modern echoes of what the Vikings did instinctively. Moving with purpose. Moving in daylight. Letting the body earn its rest. Because the truth is, sleep doesn't begin when you lie down. It begins with how you move through your day. When your body is used, challenged, spent, in the right ways, it begins to crave sleep, not resist it. It welcomes the restoration. And when that happens, sleep becomes deeper. More complete. More satisfying. So if you're someone who struggles to fall asleep, or who wakes in the night feeling restless, it might be worth asking not just what you're doing before bed, but what you've done all day. Have you moved? Have you felt the sun on your face? Have you used your muscles in a way that felt real, not just for fitness, but for life? The Vikings didn't need to schedule their workouts. Their lives were movement. And because of that, their nights were rest. And in the end, that's what it's all about. Balance. Effort followed by recovery. Energy followed by peace. That's not something you can buy or track or download. It's something you feel in your bones. Something you come back to, day after day, night after night, just like they did. There's another quiet truth about Viking sleep, one that might seem small at first, but actually runs deep. It's something most of us never even think about, the sound of sleep. In the modern world, we've come to believe that the ideal sleeping environment should be completely silent. We chase silence like it's the ultimate goal: soft closing doors, double insulated windows, white noise machines to cancel out the neighbor's dog, and foam earplugs pressed deep into our ears. For many people, the slightest sound, a creak in the hallway, a car passing outside, a faucet dripping, can feel like an assault on their rest. But the Vikings? They didn't sleep in silence. Not even close. They lived and slept in longhouses, large, communal wooden structures shared by families, servants, sometimes even livestock. These spaces were full of life at all hours. At night, when the fires had dimmed and most had settled into sleep, the longhouse never fell completely quiet. There was the low crackle of embers smoldering in the hearth. The soft rustling of hay or straw under bodies shifting on wooden platforms. The rhythmic breathing of the people nearby. The occasional murmur of a sleeper turning in their blankets or whispering in their dreams. A child stirring. A dog sighing in its sleep. Cows shifting their weight behind a dividing wall. And outside, the world didn't hold its breath either. The wind moved through the trees. Rain tapped against the roof. The ocean, never far off, hummed with tide and current. These sounds weren't disruptive. They were natural. Constant. Ambient. They were the soundtrack of life continuing gently in the background, a kind of acoustic blanket that wrapped around you and said, "Everything is okay. You're not alone." And that, right there, is the key, because as strange as it sounds, absolute silence isn't always the friend of sleep. For some, it can even be unsettling. When a room is too quiet, the brain doesn't relax, it stays alert. On edge. Listening for any break in the stillness. In that kind of silence, a small sound can feel like a jolt. The brain registers it as danger, and the body responds with tension. The Vikings didn't have to deal with that. Their sleeping environment was full of small, steady sounds, none of them threatening. None of them sharp or sudden. Just the ordinary music of people and animals coexisting in a shared space. We now know that this kind of consistent, low-level background noise can actually help the brain settle into deeper sleep. It gives the nervous system a kind of sound map, a familiar landscape that tells it there's nothing to worry about. No predator lurking. No threat approaching. Just life, humming along. Think of it like sleeping near a campfire. You don't need silence to rest, you need safety. And sometimes, safety sounds like breath, and footsteps, and wind. Of course, modern life is different. Most of us don't sleep in communal spaces. We live in separate rooms, behind closed doors, often with soundproofing as a selling point. And in many ways, that's good, we value privacy, and we need boundaries. But in chasing perfect silence, we may have lost something more ancient, the comfort of familiar sounds. The Vikings understood that sleep didn't require a vacuum. It required familiarity. Predictable sounds. Soft noises. Repetition. And if you've ever slept better with the window cracked open, or found the hum of a fan comforting, or drifted off more easily while someone you trust breathes beside you, you've felt a piece of what they lived every night. This isn't about recreating a Viking longhouse in your bedroom. It's about rethinking what quiet really means. It's about understanding that rest doesn't demand a total absence of sound, it often flourishes when surrounded by the right sounds. Maybe that means letting a soft playlist run through the night. Or the low hum of an air purifier. Or even just accepting that the distant traffic, the creaking walls, the sound of your partner turning over, none of that has to ruin your sleep. In fact, it might actually be part of it. The Vikings didn't seek stillness. They sought comfort. And that comfort came from being part of a living, breathing space, even in the middle of the night. And when you think about it, that's kind of beautiful, because in a world where so many of us feel alone in our sleep, lying in our separate rooms, worried, staring at the ceiling, hoping for silence, it's strangely comforting to remember that our ancestors slept surrounded by sound, by family, by firelight, by the gentle rhythm of life continuing just beyond the edge of the blankets. They didn't need complete quiet to rest. They just needed to feel safe. And maybe we do too. And in the end, maybe the most remarkable thing about Viking sleep, the quiet miracle hiding underneath all the details, is this: they weren't trying to optimize anything. They didn't track their sleep cycles. They didn't meditate with an app. They didn't read studies on circadian rhythms or biohack their way into slow-wave sleep. They weren't sipping magnesium powders or wearing blue light glasses. They didn't have to remind themselves to turn off screens or set alarms for wind down mode. They were just living. Following the natural rhythm of the world around them. Rising with the sun. Resting when it set. Moving their bodies. Eating real food. Telling stories. Trusting sleep to come when it was ready. There was no strategy. No formula. No special routine. And yet, they had what so many of us are still chasing. A sleep that was deep, consistent, healing. A sleep unburdened by guilt or anxiety. A sleep that wasn't treated as a fragile thing, but as a natural one. It's almost ironic, isn't it? That in our age of endless information, advanced tools, and medical solutions, we've somehow made rest harder. We've wrapped sleep in a layer of pressure. Of fear. Of judgment. We spend so much time thinking about how to sleep that we forget what it feels like to simply let go. But the Vikings, they had no such baggage. They didn't seek perfect conditions. They didn't try to control every variable. They simply lived in a way that welcomed sleep. That made space for it. That trusted the body to do what it already knew how to do. And that's the part we so often forget: the human body is wired for rest. It doesn't need permission. It just needs support. Darkness. Movement. Warmth. Nourishment. Comfort. Familiar sounds. A story at the end of the day. That's all. The Vikings weren't sleep experts, but they created, without effort, without intention, a kind of natural ecosystem where rest could thrive. It was baked into their way of life. And that life, while harsh in many ways, was beautifully aligned with the body's deepest rhythms, which makes you wonder, what would it take for us to get a little of that back? Not by pretending we live in longhouses or giving up the comforts of modern life, but by softening our approach. By remembering that sleep isn't a test to pass or a system to hack. It's a return. A release. A part of being human. Maybe it means dimming the lights an hour earlier. Moving your body in ways that feel good. Eating a little simpler. Speaking gently before bed. Reclaiming rituals that don't feel like rules, but like comfort. Maybe it means being less strict and more kind, to yourself, to your body, to your sleep, because what the Vikings show us isn't a prescription. It's a reminder that rest isn't earned through perfection, it's granted through presence. Through trust. Through rhythm, and the good news? That kind of sleep, the kind we long for, the kind that heals us, it's not gone. It's still available. Underneath all the noise, it's waiting for us to make space again, not by doing more, but by doing less, just like they did. So maybe tonight, you'll think of them, the Vikings, lying on straw beds, wrapped in wool and fur, listening to the fire crackle, surrounded by the soft sounds of a home settling in for the night. No pressure. No performance. Just rest. And maybe, in that moment, your own sleep will come a little easier too. And that's it for tonight's journey into the quiet world of Viking sleep. Funny how people living 1,000 years ago, without gadgets or guides, ended up creating a better sleep environment than most of us have today. If you enjoyed this slow story and want more peaceful, thought-provoking tales like it, feel free to subscribe to Thursday Na Storytime. It really helps the channel grow, and I'd love to have you here for the next one. Until then, rest well, and may your dreams be a little wiser tonight. Good night.
cả cho anh Thành.
Quay nó bên đó đâu, không quay bên này. Không có đỏ. Nói xì xì như nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhăn